Okay, then you all go ahead.
Okay, noting a quorum, I'll call the meeting of the Oldham County Board of Education to order. Today is March 29th, 2021, and we're at the Robert Arvin Education Center. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, there it is. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Superintendent, do you have any changes?
There are no changes tonight.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Made by Mr. Dodson, second by Ms. Hunley. All in favor, and that's 4-0. Okay, earlier today, the Oldham County District Finance Corporation met. The members of the Board of Education make up that Finance Corporation, and we met to discuss bond issues, and we have an action item on the agenda for approving a joint resolution with the Finance Corporation, and we have Dwight Salisbury here from Ross Sinclair Associates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as you indicated, the Finance Corporation kind of did step one of the refinancing process to refinance your Series 2012, and then the resolution in front of the board is kind of step two of that, which is to enter into a lease agreement with the School District Finance Corporation and direct them to sell the refunding bonds. So if there's no questions, I'll just read the resolution.
Okay, go ahead.
This is a resolution of the Board of Education of the Oldham County School District initiating the refinancing process in order to refund and retire all of the outstanding Oldham County School District Finance Corporation School Building Revenue Bonds, Series of 2012, originally issued to finance the projects, authorizing and approving the execution of a lease agreement with the Oldham County School District Finance Corporation, and any further necessary instruments, authorizing and approving the execution of continuing disclosure procedures, and approving the plan of refinancing said projects generally.
Okay, is there any questions of Mr. Salisbury of the resolution? Okay, Superintendent, your recommendation on this action item?
Approve the resolution initiating the refinancing process and authorizing and approving the lease agreement with the OCS District Finance Corporation as presented.
Okay, we've heard the recommendation. Is there a motion on that recommendation? Motion by Mrs. Hunley, second by Mr. Kehoe. All in favor? That's 4-0. Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you all very much.
Next item on the agenda is instructional session, and we have Leslie McKinney here for that.
So just as a precursor, so obviously this year we've gotten some money from the federal government. This is the second allocation on ESSER 2. And I just want to give Leslie and everybody that worked on this kudos, because it wasn't a lot of money and we had to strategically decide how to spend this money to get the most bang for our buck. This is the $1.5 million that we received. And Leslie will also give you a little bit better news than that I've not really shared with you, because there's a little bit more only if we do one thing, which we were going to do anyway. So I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Hi, Leslie.
How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, let me, before I start, pass out.
Yeah. Got it.
What you're about to receive from Superintendent Schultz is a revised copy of what Ms. Easton sent you in the enclosure packet. We did make a couple of updates based on some more solidified quotes that we received for a couple of items. I indicated on that revised document very clearly what changed, so you don't have to read the whole thing over. You can just look for those highlights. Obviously, it didn't change the bottom line because it's a budget. However, you'll see where we were able to shift some funds to make sure that we covered all of our priority needs. Additionally, there's a copy of the PowerPoint there for you. I know it's small, but it may be a place for you to jot notes. If you would like a copy of this presentation afterwards, I will send it to Ms. Easton and she can ship it off to you. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Today we are focused specifically on, as Superintendent Schultz said, the second round of federal relief funds that we got in terms of a full allocation in the form of what's called ESSER 2 funds. If we think back to last spring, we received what was called the CARES Act funds. That included GEAR and ESSER 1 funding. Additionally, we got some sub-grants, if you will, that were smaller in scale. For example, a last mile grant that assisted us with helping with technology and data needs for our students of poverty across the district to offset some of the cost of that. We also had a data coach, for example, stipend of about $15,000 that we were able to use to assist us with doing some virtual learning things. But certainly our biggest grants came from ESSER 1 and GEAR, and they totaled about $512,000. Recently, we received our newest federal allocation from what we call ESSER 2 funds. At this time, they have not released GEAR 2 funds. We are not sure if schools will actually receive GEAR 2 funds at this point, but there is talk of that. You'll see that more in private schools, post-secondary, and that sort of thing. But I wouldn't be surprised if we don't end up getting some GEAR 2 funds as well. Right now, we have ESSER 2 funds. Those funds come out to about $1.5 million. You'll see that exact amount here shortly. And those funds are substantially larger than our first round, not because we are getting a grander total per pupil, but because there was more money flowing through ESSER 2 than there was through the CARES Act. And so actually we received less per pupil than we did with CARES, because our poverty has since gone down even more in our county. Unfortunately, most federal funding is tied to your county poverty level, and that is not the same as having a free or reduced lunch level at schools. It really is about the level of poverty, typically of ages 5 through 17 in your community. But we were glad to see that we got about 3 times as much with this allocation as we did the previous allocation. I will say that there are other pots of money that we anticipate getting and coming in the near future that are sort of trickling out. There is word of ESSER 3 money coming out, which is supposed to be substantially larger than ESSER 2. There are no guarantees. I assume that funding formula will be the same. And so for some districts, that may be 3, 4, 5 times as much as they got in this round. For us, it may be 1. So we really won't know that until we get it. But we do anticipate more funding coming down the road in the next few months probably, that we can again look at to meet our needs. One of the things that you're here today for is to sign off on what the superintendent is assuring with the use of these funds. Anytime you receive any kind of grant funding, whether that be state or federal funding, the district must assure to do certain things. And I sent you a copy of those assurances with Ms. Easton's board enclosure. Those assurances range from how you're going to spend the money to how you're going to record, how you're going to progress monitor, a whole list of things that we comply to if we are recipients of these funds. If you approve those assurances today, then we will qualify for the ESSER 2 funds, and at this time it's $1,529,417. Okay? If, however, we agree to spend that money a certain way, we can get potentially up to another $871,000 with this round of money. Now that second pot of money that's in green here is a tentative amount. That's my own personal calculation, not an allocation that the state has given us. That's based on what they're telling me they're using as a funding formula. I anticipate it could be as high as $871,000. So here's the stipulation. It's really pretty simple. There are 3 ways that you can have access to that extra, and for us it's $871,000. For other districts it could be more or less than their ESSER. For us, you know, it's a lot of money because we have a lot of students. But I'll give you an example. If you were a small district with a small enrollment that's high poverty, it might not be in your best interest to try to get that extra funding, because here are the strings. The first string is you have to agree to all the assurances, which we have to do anyway, so that one was easy. The next string was you had to have at least so many students enrolled in school by April. We already met that. So we already met 2 of the 3 criteria before we even started. For us, the only thing we had to consider about whether or not this money would be useful for us, and that'll make more sense in a minute because $871,000 seems like it would be useful to everybody. But there's a way you have to spend this money in order to get that. If you want to get that state set aside for us, that $871,000, you have to agree to spend at least 85% of your ESSER 2 allocation on what they call direct student services. Now, there are lots of things that fall into direct student services. As a matter of fact, the majority of what we wanted to spend on were considered direct student services. But things like technology, things like even some types of furniture would not be considered there. So what a district needed to do is say, okay, based on your needs assessment, where do most of your expenses fall, direct or indirect? If at least 85% of them fell as direct, then you would want to take advantage of this extra money. So for us, that was easy. We very much can justify spending 85, even 100% of our dollars on direct services. The strange part, but the good part is, once you agree to take that state set aside, and we'll do that today, so you'll actually get to decide whether you want it today. It's not competitive. It's not if the state wants to give it to you. If you as a board decide that you want these funds and you agree to those terms, then we will get those funds. Again, that amount may be a bit different, But we don't have to wait on that, I guess is what I'm saying, some extra award. We are simply saying we agree to live by this criteria. We would like to take advantage. The nice thing about that extra money is they don't have the same strings attached, which means you could spend 100% of those funds on non-direct student services if you wanted to. So while you do have to spend that first portion, that for us, that 1.5 million a certain way, you are very, very free and flexible to spend that 871,000 in the way that best meets your district's needs. So before I move on to how we think we would like to spend this, are there any questions about the two potential funding sources here?
Is there any questions?
Are school buses included in that funding?
They would not be considered a direct student service, so they definitely wouldn't be something you could do under the ESSER 2. However, they could be, under certain circumstances, allowable under the state set-aside, and we've actually talked about that. The issue would be for us is it still has to be what we can say is COVID-related. So if we were adding additional buses, for example, to increase social distancing, that could be allowable under the state set-aside.
Yeah.
But if we're just replacing buses we already have that we would have been replacing, then that's not COVID-related and we couldn't spend it that way. So that's a great question, and every one of these situations you have to think about and think through each one of them to meet all of that litmus test. So yes and no.
Leslie, what does the acronym ESSER stand for? ESSER?
It is the, oh my goodness, I have ESSA in my head every so. It is the Educational Secondary and Supplemental Educational Relief Act.
Okay.
Sorry. I think it is on the front page of the document that I gave you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I always will have ESSA in the top of my thinking. So
Any other questions before we move on? And we will see this as an action item this evening. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. What we did was, as you know, we did quite a bit of a large-scale needs assessment last spring about the needs we had related to COVID. Those included immediate needs, needs that we had in the summer, and needs that we had projecting on how we would open up schools last fall. We have adjusted to those needs throughout the year, and we've had to tweak that somewhat as new needs have arisen, and things that we thought we would want to spend or need money on, we didn't necessarily need to spend funds that way. And so we're able to adjust that, but instead of having an entirely new system for a needs assessment, we chose to build on the committees we already had in place. And so we had essentially several subcommittees working. We also had parent forums. We had principal forums. We reached out to the board members to get feedback on things we needed to consider as an immediate priority, but also unforeseen things that we needed to consider perhaps down the road. These grants typically last about 27 months, so you don't have to immediately spend. However, with such a low allocation as what we have in this district, given our size, most of these funds will probably move pretty quickly. And so these subcommittees, just to give you an idea who was on them, we added 2 additional subcommittees to this round. What you see in blue there are original committees. We added 2 more for a couple of reasons. One, we found that health and safety began to be a bigger issue, and it needed to be its own sort of committee to look at things from mental health to social emotional health to physical health, those types of things. And so we made it its own committee. And then in the previous needs assessment, we had our special populations were represented in the instructional part or component of the original needs assessment committee. And that was fine. However, that is such a large committee with so much to think about in terms of instruction, and the fact that we added a new heavy layer of summer programming and that sort of thing, we decided it might be better for our equitable services folks to be represented on their own. And so we opened up a new committee that Janet Frazier chaired, and that looked at things like our urban center, our preschool, our EL population, our disabled 504, all of those populations that we wanted to ensure were still heard from, and that maybe in the larger scheme of instruction may not have had quite the voice that they needed to. And so each of these committees met. Most of them had many, many members from across the district on them, wide range of stakeholders. And once these committees met over the course of about a month and a half, they brought back their priority needs and their requests, and we looked at those as a primary committee. Now, when we added the primary committee folks, we added things like level directors to that. The superintendent was there. Although Dr. Smith was a chair of one of our subcommittees, Mr. Dees was not, so he was on this committee as well. We also, even though technology was represented in the logistics committee, we brought Trey on board because we know the technology issue on a broader scale was something we needed more in-depth information on. And so essentially brought everybody back to the table, including some finance folks, and we said, here's what each committee is saying their immediate needs are. And here's what they're saying some of their long-term needs are. And then we essentially just went through the process of saying, what are we in a position to fund? How can we stretch this dollar to maximize it across the district? And then we really thought hard about what was sustainable. One of the big concerns that we had were some of the needs that folks had. While great needs, they weren't always COVID-related needs. And so some of the things got kind of scratched off the immediate list just strictly because this is COVID-related money and those were not COVID-specific related needs. So we put together a spending plan, which I'm about to share with you now. When you look at the documentation that Ms. Easton sent to you, you saw that broken up into two funding sources, the ESSER II, and the back page was the state set-aside. What I'm going to go through now in the spending plan are those things at the same time, and here's why. It's not that one was more of a priority than the other. We simply added those two pots of money together and figured out the best way to make that money go across the two funding sources. So essentially, you're going to see it as two spending plans there, but it's one spending plan when we go to look at it here. Okay, so our first group was the health group, and again, we had several areas that fell into the health situation: physical and health and wellness, social emotional health, and mental health. When we talk about physical health and wellness, there were two big expenditures that came out of here. One was a hearing and vision machines, or screening machines that our nurses could use so that they could screen more children and that they could screen them more quickly. We have some older equipment that does the job. However, we have a really hard time social distancing because of the amount of time it takes the nurses to get the children through that type of screening process. And so these are going to expedite how many kids we can screen and, again, keep social distancing at the same time. We are excited about this because screening is a part of what we're required to do as a district. This past year, we did receive a waiver, as in most districts, to bypass some of that screening for just the reasons I told you about, just the manpower and the time it took to do them. So we're excited about being able to purchase this equipment so that we can screen more children and, again, more quickly. Additionally, we found ourselves in a situation where, as we opened school back up after Christmas break, looking at having to do contact tracing on the weekend in order to ensure that our students came back on Monday morning safely. And if there were any exposures over the weekend that we couldn't get by the health department, that we were reaching out to those folks and making them aware that we had identified cases and ensuring these kiddos didn't get on the bus, for example, or come into a classroom. And our nurses did a fabulous job of doing that. However, it got to be quite time-consuming for quite a few of them, depending on the school, as to how many phone calls, calling the bus garage, having to make all of those arrangements to ensure that our students were safe on Monday. So we did set aside a small amount of money to compensate them at their hourly rate in order for them to come in on the weekends during this time period and essentially do that contact tracing for us. So those are the two big items that fall into health. That came to about $6,000. The nursing part compensation for contact tracing was about $6,000, and it was about $45,000 for the screening machines. When we look at social emotional health, you've probably heard that on the news, and you've probably heard that throughout the community. Obviously, a large concern of folks during the pandemic was the social emotional needs of our students and also our staff and their families. And so one of the things that came out of this needs assessment was the need to have a social emotional learning curriculum that we could use K through 12, and that also had a virtual component. We currently do have some social emotional curriculum that's being used at the elementary level. However, there is no vertical alignment with that in our secondary schools, and also it doesn't have a strong virtual component. And so it was very difficult to do social emotional learning lessons virtually with those materials. So we're excited about what this program can offer all the way K through 12, but also whether in school or out of school, it will assist our counselors with being able to ensure we can meet the social emotional needs of our students and our teachers. And then finally, when we talk about mental health, again, oftentimes you hear that sort of alongside of social emotional, but when we address the mental health concerns of our students and families, particularly given mitigating what's going on with COVID, the economic factors that are going on in our community, the need for resources for our families who are often stuck trying to find extra services for their children, we did identify that we have an immediate need for social work support. And so this particular line item is to hire 2 full-time social workers for 1 year with the discretion of the superintendent the following year, depending on funding and need, to request additional time for them. But for now, it would be a 1-year contract for 2 folks that would serve across the district in that capacity. So before I move on from health, are there any questions about these particular items? Okay. The next one we're going to look at is food service related needs. Now this one of the things that was nice about ESSER II funds is it did allow us to go back to prior expenses and essentially reimburse ourselves for any allowable expenditures that we had in terms of, for example, food related costs. We initially were going to charge our summer feeding from last year to FEMA. We did a lot of work with FEMA, a lot of work for FEMA, and FEMA across Kentucky and the nation just fell apart. It just did not come through at all. And did so for very few school organizations. It simply was not designed to do what they were trying to do with it. So we had already done a lot of the legwork on pulling up all the information we needed to substantiate the COVID need for summer feeding. We did not consider summer feeding that occurred before July 1, just because we had already closed out that fiscal year. And so what we would like to do here is reimburse our food service program itself in the amount of $106,000, which is not all of their expenses, but it's a large amount of their food expenses, food and milk expenses for summer feeding. That happened in July through early August. That'll give them some additional support as we move into more initial funding for the summer with summer feeding and continuing that support for our students. So this is not new expenses. This would simply be us taking charges we have already charged to general fund, well, the food service piece of that, and reimbursing them for that and making them a little more whole so that they don't stay or go in the red. So any questions about food service?
Yes.
Yes.
Shocking, I know. Are we going to continue to feed everybody for free? Because I have a real problem with that.
Well, and that may be not a conversation probably for me, but I can tell you what I know. That is not something that's an Oldham County thing just to feed all of the kids, though I know that we have a heart to make sure that our students are provided for in that way. The summer feeding, and Brent may be able to chime in on some of this, the summer feeding initial grant was initially slated to run out at the end of June. That has been now extended, and so that summer feeding can go on all the way up until school starts?
Up to that, and then it goes through September 30th.
Through September 30th. And so the short answer would be is I would anticipate we will continue to feed children. The long answer would be I don't know what form it would be.
But we won't be delivering them at the same time we did. It's going to be concentrated in certain schools.
Okay.
But they'll have access to it. It's just that we won't necessarily be delivering it.
And I would just like to point out, because I know, Ms. Hunley, you and I have had that conversation about the EBT cards also, that we had no control over that whatsoever. That was the state and federal government kind of messing that up. So a lot of people got those cards that shouldn't have gotten those cards, but that was not a district thing. That was out of our hands. And I think they've gotten that somewhat better fixed now as they progress through that time period.
I can certainly get you some information of who you might contact to find out more about what that looks like and what the thinking is behind that, who really oversees that in terms of what part of the State Department is looking into that. I just simply would not be being honest with you if I told you any more. I just don't know enough about it, other than to say we're just doing what they're asking us to do.
Oh, no, I totally understand. I just want to point out the fact that it isn't free. Like, people have this feeling that it's all free, but obviously it is not free if we're taking $106,000 and reimbursing somebody for feeding people all year. And I'm not discounting
Sure.
the fact that we fed hungry children. Obviously we did. I'm just pointing out the fact that there is a myth that this is free. It does not cost our district any money, when in fact $106,000 is being used to reimburse it. That's all I want to point out.
And I guess one thing I would tell you why that probably has such a different appearance across the state is most districts got a substantial amount of money and were able to use that money for their feeding. We just, at that very $500,000 mark, we just had to make some choices. Very easily, we could have used all of that for feeding and chose to not spend it on something else. And so most districts are probably not digging into their general fund pocket the way we had to, just because they got substantially more in federal relief fund. But that's a great point. It came at a cost from some funding source for sure. Any more questions about food service?
I just want to point out that the $106,000 isn't necessarily Oldham County dollars. We're reimbursing ourselves with ESRI money.
Right, currently, our food service department spent that money on food and milk and other needs for food service. We did not include any personnel cost in this particular number. So they have spent that money out of their funds, and now they're reimbursing them with ESSER funds.
Federal dollars.
That's
yeah.
right, we are reimbursing them. Just as we could have, like I said initially, just charged them there to begin with. We obviously didn't know about a new round of funding coming when we made those initial decisions, and so, the cost had to come, so.
Are you okay? We can move on, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay, the next one we want to look at is technology needs. We address a great deal of technology needs with our initial CARES funding, and we still have a great deal of those funds still left to spend that are earmarked to ensure that all of our students have access to data hotspots and the devices they need at home. And so we did not feel like we needed to take a huge amount out of this second round to support the technology we need that is COVID related. However, we did have many devices that were damaged. Some were lost. We have some needs, specific needs, where we think we just need additional devices for certain populations, maybe of students or certain schools. And so these funds will be used really, they're earmarked to take care of those immediate needs. So it's adding additional devices as we need it, repairing or replacing other devices that we currently have.
On the damaged ones or what have you, are we charging it back to the parents?
No, we will not be charging it back to the parents. Some of the things that I want to be clear too, a lot of what are out of service technology devices, according to what Trey and I talked about right now, have fairly minor damage, but it's enough damage that we can't send it home. Maybe it's missing keys on the keyboard. When you have that many devices that you're trying to get back and forth to everyone, and I think he shared this with you, our staff right now is limited in the technology department, and so trying to get those minor repairs done has been a challenge in order to get those devices right back out. So it's not that some have such major damage that we can't repair them. We may use some of these funds to get some folks to come in here and help us do those repairs and get these knocked out and put back in service. I don't know of any instances, and then I'll turn it over to you, that we do know that damage has occurred to our devices in the hands of folks, but that is the way that their public school was delivered to them. And in certain homes, accidents happen. And so I think that Trey has looked at perhaps what it would cost to insure some of these devices, and just in the big, large scheme of things, we just have to be really careful about how we go about making large-scale things like insurances and replacement costs and things like that. But I know that those are being considered with any new devices being bought, whether or not they're going to have those additional features. I will leave, I don't want to speak out of turn, so if either of you have to add something.
I would just say that, we made a philosophical decision back in April of last year that we weren't going to allow our fear of a device to go either missing or to get damaged for a kid not to get a device and learn. And so I know I had a couple of schools that were like, whoa, I don't know if I can send those home. It's like, trust me, we will make you whole when it's all said and done, because ultimately kids have to be learning. Now when I said that, we didn't know we'd be on as long as we were. So it was a good thing we made that decision, because if we had not, then I would hate to think where we'd be at a learning stance at this point. But I would also like to say that I cannot think of any reports of malicious damage. In other words, like kids just taking it and heaving it or throwing it. The devices are a couple $100 and wear and tear on them. They're burning them up. I mean, this one today is a loaner that I've got, and its mouse is not working. So it just happens. So I want to assure the board that this is not holding folks accountable. This is things happen. When you go home, you got a little brother that maybe steps on your computer because you left it there by the couch, not meaning to. Stuff like that, but nothing malicious that I'm aware of.
The large percent of that was normal wear and tear, replacing from attrition from that round, the first round of the devices that were out, and also planning for that same amount of kind of natural attrition as the next round coming back and go return to full version of construction.
So each school is monitoring their own unique situations, the devices they've loaned out. Trey is filling in the gaps of those schools who need additional devices, and so again, we're looking to target federal funds to make us whole for things that were Oldham County property initially that have been damaged or lost in the meantime. But like Superintendent Schultz said, our primary goal was to get instruction in the hands of students, and so we didn't let that become a barrier for that. Our next area came out of that new equity subcommittee that we spoke about. And particularly, that looked at all sorts, again, of special needs populations, even specifically minority poverty students, but also students at the Arts Center, the Arvin, gifted students. So just any student who was an outlier of just falling within general instruction were considered in this particular group. Lots of groups, even though you don't see them all up here, they may have gotten funding in different ways. For example, they may have said their need fell within summer learning, so you're going to see their amounts falling into summer school kinds of activities. These are things that fall outside of summer school support for some of those special populations. So for gifted and talented, we're looking at $19,000. Kappa and the Arts Center, $4,500. I'll talk about what these are in a second. We have some real specific EL support. And then Frisky support. Currently, we have a family resource youth center that serves LaGrange and the preschool. And so we know that they've also been tapped into by other schools across the district because we simply don't have Friskies here in our district like other districts have. And so they had some additional needs. They sort of went through their stockpile of things, materials and things that they needed to support families. So we are giving them an additional $6,000 to spend in areas that you might think of more as welfare type of things, making sure they have school supplies. Sometimes it's clothing that they need. It's things that they need in order to access their education specifically. In terms of gifted and talented, we have a couple of items there. One of the things that we found was it was very difficult, especially in the fall, to assess our students for gifted and talented situations in the fall, and so we need additional tests for that, so that will pay for us to be able to test our 4th and 7th graders and not just our 3rd and 6th this coming next school year. Additionally, the gifted and talented department didn't receive any funds like the other schools did in the CARES money for additional manipulatives and things to promote social distancing, and so they have a pocket of money, $3,000 here, to buy additional manipulatives and support materials for when they do their small groups so that students do not have to share. And then they also have a really unique situation with our Arts Center. Our visual learning students that are gifted in the area of visual learning tend to get service through our Arts Center, and they do that as a fee-based, but because they weren't able to generate those funds, they are actually getting the registration fees out of this, or requesting the registration fees to offset those costs for those students so that they could get their gifted and talented services through the Arts Center at no cost. That's at $6,750. So that was our gifted and talented outside of summer programming. Kappa and the Arts Center, one of the things that they do is a part of their assessments and a part of their instructional piece is they do, they tape or film, and they've always done this even before live streaming, their actual performances. With live streaming this year, they weren't able to generate as much money from their audiences because they were limited in size, obviously, with COVID. And so the money they usually used from fees that they charged people to come in and watch those, they didn't have in order to offset the cost of their live streaming, in order to have that program come in and be live streamed for them. They use that performance information with the students to go back and review their performance as an assessment tool. So they're seeking $4,500 to offset the ability to continue to assess their students in the same way, given that they're not getting the folks coming in and being able to pay to see some of the performances as they have in the past. EL support is really looking at a bilingual community resource coordinator, if you will, someone who can coordinate across all spectrums of education and community resources for our English language learners. This is a position that would work closely with schools, students, and families. And what you're seeing here is the cost for this position for 1 year, and the same thing holds true as what we said with the social workers. It's a 1-year position with potential to be ongoing should the need and the funds be available to do that. So all that entire amount is to offset that one salary for that one certified person. And then we already spoke about the $6,000 for the Frisky. So are there any questions about the equitable services amounts? Or
I just want to bring up that if you remember during a couple of site-based meetings, we talked about EL and the need for a counselor. Alec and his group, basically we've tweaked this to make that kind of meet some of those needs as well. But it's like a counselor on steroids, because they're going to be able to not only deal with families, but they're going to connect them to outside resources and hopefully build efficacy among the rest of our counselors with those same type of services. We're not wealthy or rich in services here in Oldham County, and so our counselors just don't have the wherewithal per se to actually draw people to there. So this person, we hope, is going to be able to make that connection with our families that we currently do not have.
Okay.
So moving on to our largest piece of the pie, our instructional related needs. In a minute, you'll see a breakdown of each of these categories and what percentage of the overall budget these represent. And so this committee was still very large, even though we pulled the equity piece out. They were still a very large committee, and they had a lot of things to consider. And so I want to go through each of these items and let you know what we're proposing here. When we talk about curriculum and the professional learning that goes along with the curriculum, we are essentially talking about two pieces of curriculum here. An elementary math curriculum for some of our schools and a middle school math curriculum for some of our schools. And those total $300,000, and it provides us with that over the course of several years. And so this was a need of ours. It's an even greater need now that we have the COVID gaps going on with our learning loss and that sort of thing. So we're hoping that the addition of these curriculum materials will help us in those areas with math, which is something we've also talked about in the fall with our data release, math being a growing area of concern for our district. When we look at assessment, these are actually not assessments. These are assessment platforms for elementary and secondary schools that allow different pieces of assessment to sort of dump into them. And it will allow for disaggregation and manipulation of that data so that teachers and schools can very easily look at data from various data points and make instructional decisions, particularly as it relates to learning loss these students may have. So there's lots that go into that. It's a big price tag for that. This is, again, an elementary and a secondary, and it's a 3-year subscription. So that $362,000 will last us 3 years of this platform for each of these. And then, of course, there's a professional learning piece that goes with that. I'll stop at those first two and see if there are any questions about those specifically.
So are these new programs?
They are.
So what happens at the end of 3 years? Are we expected then to continue on the programs?
I think, as we talk about curriculum, that's always an evolving thing that a school or a district is going to have to commit to from year to year to year. Typically, with curriculum, you're looking at 5 years before a new curriculum is looked at again. So I don't know what sort of residual funding, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Smith in a second, will be required after that. I think at this point what we're trying to do is utilize those resources now, see if they're the right resources to meet our needs, and if they are, of course, the general fund would have paid for this anyway in order to sustain that on a continuing basis. The assessment platforms would be exactly the same way. I think at this point we're using those to address our immediate needs. If it is something that we find beneficial moving forward, I would assume that the proposal would be to continue those with general funds, but let me turn that over to Dr. Smith.
Hi, Dr. Smith. Hi, everybody. So I guess my question would be, we're not replacing our assessment program now.
So one of the things that we're trying to work on with teachers is to focus on standards-based grading and to streamline the work that they're doing, especially in elementary school, to unpack standards and to collaborate with their partners, their PLCs, understand where kids are successful and where kids are struggling. And so in these two platforms at the elementary and the secondary level, it helps us to focus the teacher's attention on standards. It's a platform we would use for 3 years, and at the end of the 3rd year, we would decide if it's something we wanted to continue or if we wanted that to replace something else we were using and maybe not getting as much value from. Does that make sense?
Currently, we have no system that we're paying for. So
Yes.
we wouldn't be replacing something we're already paying for. It would be replacing something with something, replacing nothing, if you will. We don't have anything that does that right now outside of Infinite Campus, and that's pretty limited.
I get, but we're going to spend $660,000 for 3 years, and then initially we could spend another $200,000 a year for 2 more years from general funds.
So the math curriculum and the $300,000 piece, that is not a reoccurring cost. So in our elementary math curriculum, once we've purchased it, we would keep it for 7 years.
Okay, so that's for 7 years, so $300,000. Okay.
Yeah, the $360,000 piece in those two parts for elementary and secondary, we will use them for the 3-year window, and as we get to the 3rd year, we'll decide if we want to continue with them. It's really going to depend on the value that we see coming from it. So like all of the things that we invest money in, it needs to show a return. We need to see teachers using it efficiently. And if it comes to a point where it's as effective as we hope it is, it'll feel like a natural part of what we're doing that we want to continue, and we would look at other areas to discontinue.
In the past, some schools like to use this one curriculum, some schools like to use another one. How's this going to work? They all going to have to use the same one?
So that's a great question. So all curricular decisions happen at the building level. So I can't say to elementary schools, you shall use the following things. What we have done and spent a good deal of time working on is bringing elementary, of our 9 elementary schools, 4 use one math program now. They've used it for multiple years, they're very invested in it. The remaining 5 are looking at 2 possibilities. And they've all agreed, the principal and leadership teams have agreed that whichever one they decide to use, they're going to agree to use it all together. Which means in our 9 schools, we'll just have 2 math curriculum that'll be used at the same time, which will be extremely helpful for training and support and work going forward. So those 5 schools that are looking at this math work, they are all going to select the same one together.
Are the site-based going to be on board with this?
So the principals have prepared their site-based councils, and they also, what we have heard from all the teachers that have tested each of the curricular resources, they really like both of them. So it isn't like the principals are forcing one. Ultimately, the site-based council makes the final decision, but the principals will be coming to them with a lot of survey data and observations that they've done. Some of our principals have also taught the math lessons, so they can speak from their own personal experience.
Okay, last question.
Sure.
Is there any way we can get all the schools use the same one because it would cut down on the cost?
To be honest with you, I've tried that in 2 districts and have never had the ability to do so unless you had just 2 or 3 schools. Because for one, and I'll give you an example, when we were creating our own curriculum, we tried to have all schools use the exact same curriculum, and it was not meeting the needs of every single student across the board. And so that's the importance of the site-based council. And it has nothing to do necessarily with anything besides what the teachers are buying into and the professional learning that they get and the results that they're getting. I would be thrilled, and I am thrilled, that we're going to get it down to 2. When I was in Bullitt County, I was doing Dylan's job, I felt fortunate to get down to 3. Because before then, it was a hodgepodge of everything, and when it's a hodgepodge, when a kid transfers from here to there to there, it's hard to do that. When you're trying to compare assessments, formative assessment data, not to rank teachers or anything, but to see where growth is, it's easier to do when we're talking standards-based, because it doesn't matter what the curriculum is, the standards-based and the assessment tool that he's talking about is going to be standards aligned. So it's not going to be like, I'm using this math program, and so I should score this. It's, I'm using this math program, or I'm using this math program. Every student should get to that standard. And so that's the continual work of SLD as they build that. The other nice thing about how Dr. Smith and his team is going about this, it has not been heavy top-down. It's been strongly recommended that we look at these certain things, but there's going to be a ton of buy-in on these curriculums. And when you have a ton of buy-in, you have a much better chance of being efficient and actually working. When I got here, math curriculums have been bugaboo for the last 5 years, if not even before that. And this is really the best opportunity that we've had to get people using a research or / evidence-based math program to help with students' growth. So we've had 4 schools that have been doing Engage New York for, golly, 4 years, 5 years, give or take, Leslie? And have really shown some nice growth, but that's not necessarily the program for everybody. So when we get it down to 2, that allows some flexibility. It's also not a mandate to a site-based council, but it's been a good process because if nothing else, we're not buying something without actually testing it. It's not a salesman's come in and said, here's flashy bells and whistles. The actual end user teachers have had an opportunity to look at it, use it, talk about it, and give input.
On the assessment piece, so is that a complete and total separate assessment system, or is it taking math and it's taking K-Prep and it's going to combine those and then spit out, yes, this kid needs help in this?
At the elementary level, it is a digital grade book that'll sync up with Infinite Campus and bring together our K-Prep data, our MAP data, our DRA tests, And then as teachers are giving assessments in their classroom aligned to standards, when they put the data into the platform, it'll show them really quickly who's demonstrating mastery and who's not, and allow them to group those kids for intervention and then track the groups that they're building. What we have happening right now is teachers use Google Sheets and they hard code the stuff, and then they take the paint can and they dump the color in, and this is going to streamline that for them so that they spend their time on the analysis, not on the building of the sheet. It also lets PLCs all come together and look at a common assessment very quickly. So we're maximizing their time. At the secondary level, which is for 6th to 11th grade, the platform produces or taps into banks of standard aligned questions. So where a teacher would say, in my language arts class, we're teaching the following standards in this unit, I can spend a lot of time writing those tests. This will have banks of questions that have come out of a lot of different places. Some release questions from K-Prep and other places, but standard aligned questions that are all digitized. I can push it out through Google Classroom. Students can take it and it'll then tell me who demonstrated mastery and who didn't, and I can quickly see which kids are on track, which kids are struggling. And so again, it streamlines the work that they're doing to help teachers focus on teaching and thinking about the standards that they're working on, not the process of the grading and inputting the data, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does, thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Cahill, did you have a question?
It was kind of a combination answer by both of these, but I will kind of follow up on that. So Greg said that there was 2 curriculums in math, or you had mentioned that. What about the other subjects? Are there more than 2?
So in social studies, we developed our own curriculum in-house. And so we have a single social studies curriculum that was developed at both elementary and secondary. We had a plan for rolling out the secondary social studies curriculum that got derailed due to COVID and our teacher work days being pulled in to prepare for school to open. So we will revisit all of those resources with teachers this coming July, right before we come back to our PD days in August. So social studies is in-house. Math, we have our elementary work and our secondary work that's moving. Science will be on the horizon. So right now I can't speak to the exact curriculum that everyone is using. It really varies school to school. And language arts, we worked on that in elementary and middle school 2 years ago. And so we will be looking ahead to, you always need to circle back to refine a curriculum, but we developed that in-house also. What we're trying to do with our math work is really to tap into resources that experts have looked at and researched and refined, rather than try and develop that ourselves this summer. And so again, because of all of our work at summer school, we don't have the time to build our own math curriculum, and so this is an opportunity for us to do that. Right now, one of our Eureka schools feeds into each of our middle schools. So it's not like one middle school is all Eureka. Each one feeds into each middle school. And then our other 5 elementary schools with math, they will feed into the middle schools also. What I talked with high school principals about earlier, I guess it was last week, was we will also think of, once we standardize or let me say it a different way, each of the curricular resources that middle schools are looking at have high school applications. So whether that is Eureka or the other programs that we're looking at the middle level, they also have high school courses. And so the high school principals are now thinking about, if we were to look at adopting a curriculum at the high school for Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, Pre-Calculus, what would be some of those things that are currently being used at the middle school that would create some continuity from 6th to 11th grade? That's on the horizon also.
Thank you.
I just have a final question on the assessment. Is there going to be some type of portal where parents would be able to see their kids progressing through the assessments?
So
the new one,
right now, Infinite Campus is the right place for parents.
So this will feed into Infinite Campus.
So what I would say is that at the secondary level, the scores that teachers get out of this assessment portal can then be uploaded into Infinite Campus as a way of saying, a way of informing the percentage score that you've earned in a given core subject area. At the elementary level, this is more of a tool to understand the standards, not a parent-facing grade book. And so we're not going to shift the current practice that we're doing right now, which is it'll produce things like progress reports and other stuff that we can standardize across elementary schools, but it's not like Infinite Campus in that way.
Okay. Ms. McCann, we've hijacked your train.
Yeah, sorry about that.
One other piece that falls into that assessment category was the need for, particularly at the elementary level, an opportunity for teachers, even given the limited time they'll have this summer with summer learning, to create some assessment items for an item bank as well. And so there is about $15,000 in that larger $362,000 pot designed for them to spend about 3 days, I think 18 folks for over 3 days, to develop some items that can be used across the district by folks so that they have some common items to start looking at as it pertains to math. So that kind of wraps up assessment. The next one that you're going to see here is instruction and resources, and that essentially is about two specific items. For example, we did find a need at the secondary level to have more desks in order to social distance as we came back to school here, or coming back to school here at that level. That was about $40,000 for desks at those levels, and so that's put into that pot of money. Additionally, we have some high schools who had the need for some tools, some instructional tools to use both virtually and in person to assist with language, arts, science, and social studies areas. And so about $69,000 of that is for subscription for Actively Learn for some of our high schools. And so that makes up the largest piece of the instruction and resources part. And I'm going to skip on down and I'm going to come back to the big ticket item at the end. The very last thing you're going to see there is the need for intervention. And obviously, the buzz around is that we need to intervene on behalf of students, because we know that due to COVID, we have even more than typical, maybe students who are struggling. We have certain populations of students who are struggling. This particular pot of money is being delegated specifically to the hiring of 3 high school intervention teachers. So there would be 1 intervention teacher at each high school. That is mainly to assist us with credit recovery and those students who have fallen behind, whether that be through NTI, VLA, or in person, who have not gotten the credits they need in order to graduate on time. We anticipate that we may have some 5th-year seniors who are going to want to be able to get those credits in as quickly as they can. And so this is for 1 year, again, for 3 certified folks to work at the high school level to assist those high schools with ensuring that they can meet the needs of their students and also keep them on track with their current studies as well, sort of filling in the gap. So the intervention that you're seeing on here is limited to high school at this point, because our greatest priority was in ensuring that our 11th and 12th graders were on track to graduate. I'm going to go ahead and hit the last one, and then I'll take your questions on the whole page if you like. So the biggest ticket item is actually 3 items. It's $712,000 essentially. The biggest pot of that is to assist schools in the district with summer school and summer learning this year. That is something that traditionally as a district we have not done district-wide. We've had different schools who hit and miss, may offer some summer programming from time to time. Often that's limited to a few high schools doing some occasional credit recovery and ensuring that students get the credits they need to maybe graduate. This is going to be summer camp on steroids for us, and so every school will have summer learning opportunities. The district will have additional summer learning opportunities that will also include enrichment, social emotional learning, and recreation. For district sites, there will be some transportation offered, and I don't want to go too deep into this because I know that at another session we're really going to look at this. But at this point, just know that this covers all schools. It covers all programs, including GT, EL students, special education students. It covers ARVN, Kappa, and so it also, again, includes that social emotional learning piece that we know that's going to be vital for our students. So a big pot of this money, we anticipate being between $400,000 and $450,000 of that will be for this year's summer school. We also know that we are definitely going to have a need next summer as well, that the recovery for this will probably take multiple years. And so some money is being set aside. It's not near enough. So if we got future funding, we would probably want to earmark some of that as well for next summer. But some of this funding, and you saw a breakdown of it in the paper that I gave you, would be for next summer. And then there's also an additional amount that we just kind of, I'm not really sure how to say this. They don't have a way for you to budget a slush fund or a holding fund for needs you haven't identified yet. So you really have to make a decision about where you want to put any additional funds. We did have some funds that we thought we could sit on for a little while, for example, next year's summer school funds, and some additional funding. And so we chose to house it there. Now, what that means is if another need comes along between now and then that's of greater priority, we can simply move it. But it has to start somewhere, and so we put it in a really logical place because we know if there's ever a spot we need it in, summer program is definitely going to be one of those areas. Currently, there is some pending or proposed legislation out regarding mandatory summer school across the state. I won't go into how extensive it is, but we know that that's coming. But we also know that beyond that compliance piece that we have a great need to help students recoup as much of this slide as we can over the summer before school starts. So initially, again, this is our biggest, or in summation, this is our biggest pot of money, the instructional piece, which makes sense given our business. But if you have any particular questions about those, I'll try to answer those.
I have one. On the intervention piece, I know the high schools will appreciate that, but having one at each school, especially one at 1,000 student school and one at 1,600 student school, is not equitable. So,
Well, let me explain the model.
Okay.
So the model is that a certified teacher will be basically, for a child that's behind in credits, one of their electives will be this classroom. And they will filter into that classroom and they will still do all their other stuff, but they'll start working on earning their credits. And so it's not a matter that, in fact, my biggest fear is that maybe that they'll have some, well, it's not a fear, it's probably a hope, but they'll have some kids that want to advance and they can fit that into their schedule because they can go there and advance themselves as well. I ran this program when I was an assistant superintendent. We ran at the high schools because of the way our, not here, different county, didn't like the way our alternative school was going. And so we did this because when you keep kids in their school, where the teachers know them, the counselors know them, it was just much better. They didn't have a Beth Carter in that world. And so we basically were able to keep kids on track, caught up, and even accelerated by doing this model. And what we've urged the schools to hire is preferably a math mind person, because when you struggle online, some of it's math, but also someone that motivates and loves kids. Because it's literally, little Kevin's coming in, little Kevin's short 2 credits, he's gonna spend time with me in one day, on one period a day, and then little Kevin has a passion for band, he gets to go do band. Or he's got a passion for PE, he gets to go do PE. He gets to do all the other classes. This is just a credit recovery piece for that thing. And so I think it will probably work out well and hopefully put them out of business in a year, but because of the way the high schools are staffed, they may choose to continue this model outside of this with one of their people, because it really does work. It makes a huge difference. We took a dropout problem and a graduation rate problem and flipped it on its head by doing this when I was in Bullitt County. And so I think the model, if they hire the right person, which I'm sure they will, and they monitor the information, it will be extremely beneficial to get all kids caught back up pretty darn quickly.
Little Kevin's passion was lunch, by the way.
You would be able to eat lunch, at least once.
Let me hold you. Does anybody have any questions at this
Okay.
point?
You had mentioned mandatory summer school.
Oh, not mandatory.
Okay.
No, there was some stuff in the state that was,
Oh.
and I don't know if it's still gonna happen or not. Leslie, I got a hold of it, shared it with Leslie. We both offered our assistance to the person that was making this proposed legislation, and I did not hear back from him, but it didn't make it any farther. Because they were basically mandating things that were either illegal or counterproductive to the current funding structures like ESS and stuff like that. And so we offered to help. If you need to write a bill, we'll help you write a bill, and I never heard anything back. So right now, that's dead, but you never know. If there's a special called session, and you just never know.
And what I meant by I'm sorry, when I
No,
said
that's
not
okay.
mandatory, our programs are not mandatory. Parents can choose to come to them. The legislators were proposing a mandatory summer school program that met certain criteria. And that's what he's speaking to. But in terms of who comes, we don't mandate.
So during Site Base, we were mentioning summer school, and you said that the principals and everyone was getting together. Any time frame on a schedule? Or
On April,
anything else?
the next instructional session, we'll get more Leslie, and she'll be able to give us a broad breakdown of all the summer school programs. Because the schools, some of them are very alike, and some of them are a little bit different, but we'll have that breakdown for you in April at the next board meeting.
One other question. I think the KHSAA passed some type of resolution saying that student athletes can come back and play another year of sports.
It's actually Senate Bill 128. Ooh, that was pretty good off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Senate Bill 128.
If the
that-
students aren't behind on credits, can they still come back and play?
Yes, it's not a matter of credits, it's more or less what they call, it's a do-over year bill. We're gonna have an internal meeting with that on Thursday, and then we'll either, the way the timeline reads, and it was passed into law, is a student would have to indicate by May 1st whether they're willing to come back. The board has to make a decision by, I think, June 15th or something, if they're going to do the do-over year, but it's not a pick and choose, it's all or none. And so I know what my recommendation would be right now, which I will not give until I meet with other folks, because obviously I want to make sure that other people that are going to be around here next year have some say into that. But in many ways, students can already do that. In the ungraded primary, a student, if the parents felt a student was behind, a student could be, for lack of a better term, held back. There's a ton of research that says that's not really the best way to handle that. You could play in this rule, you get another year of eligibility. In other words, when you enter, if you were a freshman this year, you'd have 5 years to get your 4 years of eligibility in. Just a whole lot of issues, unintended consequences with that. But we'll share that a little bit later, but I want to have an internal meeting and make sure I'm looking at it objectively before we come to the board, and then you all have to make that decision.
Yeah, just an FYI, so I've already got contacted about that, and just the parent was concerned about the May 1st deadline and not knowing anything about it at all. So,
Yeah, no, we'll talk about it in April. I wrote myself a note on the legislation today, is that I'll bring a proposal to you all in April to make a decision.
Thank you.
And even if the board did not want to make that decision in April, that by statute, we don't have to. By statute, by May 1st, they have to declare, and then you would, I guess, see what you get, but we'll get there.
Okay, thanks.
Just to wrap up with your equity piece of intervention, I want to be really clear that these are intervention people in addition to the intervention staff they already have, and that a great many of the needs, especially students who need credit recovery, we're going to try to address at every high school in the summer. So the hope is that one, and we feel like one will be sufficient at each school regardless of their size, because of the way that they're structuring their summer program to try to get as many of those kids up where they need to be before the fall year actually starts. This is just kind of what we know is going to be rollover. For example, if you've got a kid who's failing 5, he can just do so much this summer. And so we know there's going to have to be work in the fall for them. So that's a great question. And we did look at equity. We really based it on what they said their actual needs were, and in conjunction with the plans they already had for credit recovery in their schedule and in the summer. Okay, so the very end, I'm sorry.
Finance left.
We're going to pull it all together. And so this is just a breakdown of where, again, these combined funds of $2.4 million are going by type. Obviously, again, that largest portion going to $71,000. And then the breakdown of the actual monies at the top. For example, $1.7 million of that is what's going toward all those instructional things you saw in the previous slide. Kind of gives you a breakdown of what that could look like as we roll through. But you have those exact numbers on the 2 sheets that I gave you with Ms. Easton. So at this point, I guess if you have any lingering questions, what we would be asking you to do today are approve the assurances that the superintendent has already agreed to, and to hopefully consider allowing us to take advantage of the state set-aside, given that we've shown you what we feel is a strong plan to meet some of our priority needs with those funding sources. Knowing that we do need some flexibility here. Sometimes things come in under budget, sometimes things come in a little higher, and we may have to sort of do some shell gaming in between, but that these are the needs that we feel like we need to be focused on with this next set of funds.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any final questions for Ms. McKinney? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So how do you spread the $1.5 million? Tightly, closely, and with a lot of work. Thanks to everybody that served on those committees.
Ready? Okay, we are back in session. Our next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. We have Stephanie Anderson here.
All right.
Hello, welcome. Nice to see you today.
You have to excuse him, he gets in a hurry.
Yeah, that's okay, that's okay. The alternative was much worse. This is the treasurer's report for the month of February. We have our cash accounts listed below. Our governmental funds began with a balance of $64 million and ended with a balance of $62.6 million. Grand total of all the cash beginning balances was $68.4 million, ending with $66 million. Prior year, our governmental funds were at 64 million, so we are slightly behind where we were last year. Our food service funds last year were at 2.3 million, so we're definitely behind there. And our daycare was at 1.7 last year, and we are at 1.2 this year. We are going to be getting some relief in our daycare. There is CRISA. We had CARES to begin with. The second round is called CRISA, and we're going to get approximately $1.9 million of that, and we will begin using that money starting in March. Primarily, we are going to be using that for salaries, but we can also use it for food and snacks that we will be serving the students. On the food service, hopefully with school being back in session, we can get some more income from those a la carte sales, which is the area that helps to boost our income there. In the second section, we have our bonded construction funds, and there's really no change there except for the interest that we've earned on it. On the following page, we have the governmental funds by each fund. The special revenue fund, you can see, is positive at this point, and that is mainly KETS money that we're really kind of waiting for the ability to get some of this product in. The orders have been made, but it's not spent yet. On the following page, we have the historical actuals comparison report. On the general fund revenue, that first line item, we've gone from 65 million to 67 million, 69, and we are again fiscal 21 at 69 million. So no real increase in our revenue over prior years. General fund salaries, we have spent less than in the prior year. Fiscal 20 was an expensive year, and fiscal 21 is at this point looking a little bit better. As we go to the next section for our general fund revenues, you can see our first line item, general property tax. We are 97-98% complete on that. Our franchise taxes have been slow, but we're starting to pick up a little bit of steam, and March we should see $700,000 coming in, so that'll improve that situation a little bit. Our delinquent property taxes, of course, we have exceeded our budget and definitely exceeded what we've brought in the prior 3 years. Motor vehicle taxes, we are ahead of budget on that and not seeing a nice steady increase over prior years. The utility taxes are at budget, and SEEK is kind of where we expect it to be. In the next two sections, the building fund revenue and capital outlay funds, those are also where we are expecting them to be. The following page, let's see. The only thing I really wanted to, this shows our revenue. The only thing I really wanted to call your attention to is this one line item. It's account 1280, revenue in lieu of taxes. This is our Dynegy payment that we use to help fund our art center. And we will get 2 more years of this, and then it will be done. All right, on page 20, I can't read that, 20, I don't know what number that is, 29 perhaps, we've got our salaries, or our expenses by category. Starting with the salaries, the third line item down, you see that 0110R, and this is where the schools have paid for their extra staffing for the year. So you can see this year we've had a considerable decrease in the amount that we spent in the prior year. So I see that as a good sign at this point. Let's see, on the following page under property services, we had an interesting thing happen here. Our expenses went up, really not that much, but it was snow removal, and this is more than we've spent in 2016, 2018. So this is a big year for snow.
No, no, no.
We've spent about $15,000 on snow removal. Total.
Say 22.
Each.
Or 20.
see, on the next page, we've got an account 0434, building, contracted building repairs and maintenance. We've spent $50,000 on a North Oldham middle floor and $16,000 on Kenwood flooring. Let's see. Again, I can't read that. I don't know if this is a 26. Let's look at the 06s, where we've got, at the top of it, we've got food, new teacher, and natural gas, bottled gas, and fuel oil. You can see the diesel fuel. We have been running historically about $310,000 year-to-date in prior years, and we are considerably down on that due to being remote at $94,000. I do expect that that will increase. And next year could be a doozy. Let's see, on the following page, under the 07s in property, we've got furniture and fixtures, and we've spent $102,000 at LaGrange, and another $6,000 at LaGrange for a cooler, and $28,000 at Kenwood. If we look at that final page of the historical comparison report, you can see the expenses and the grand totals. We went from $47 million to $48 million to $53 million, and we've got $48.6 million. And do remember that we have a number of costs that have been removed and moved over to Fund 2 because of that seat replacement, and that was $2.2 million, so that brings our costs up to $50.8. So I feel much better about that. Last year was kind of an expensive year, so let's hope we stay on track this year. All right, the following report shows your expenses by function, and no big tales on this one. Page 31, we've got just a reminder of what that seat replacement grant covered. We are still getting SEEK on a monthly basis, but it is at a lesser amount, and it will eventually, we'll be short at this $2.2 million. On page 32, we've got the summary of bonding potential, which has not changed. Shortly after that, we have the balance sheets by fund, and then we have the income statements by fund as well. And that concludes the treasurer's report.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on the treasury report? Okay, Superintendent, your recommendation?
Approve, excuse me, approve as presented.
Okay, we got the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve the financial statements made by Ms. Hunley, seconded by Mr. Dodson? All in favor, and that is 4-0. Bills and claims.
All righty, on page 102 are the bills and claims. Our invoice count this month is 1,442, and that was spent for almost $5 million worth of bills and claims. And on the following pages, you have the detail behind that and some descriptions as well.
Okay, any questions on bills and claims? Superintendent, your recommendation.
Approve bills and claims as presented.
Okay, we have the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve the bills and claims by Ms. Hunley, seconded by Mr. Dodson? All in favor? That's 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, we have 4 sets of minutes to approve. First set is February 22nd, regular board meeting. Is there a motion to approve that set of minutes? Made by Mr. Kehoe, second by Ms. Hunley. All in favor? That's 4-0. Next set is February 23rd, special called SBDM board meeting. Is there a motion to approve? Made by Mr. Dodson, second by Mr. Kehoe. All in favor? 4-0. Next set is February 25th, special called SBDM board meeting. Motion by Mr. Dodson, second by Mr. Kehoe. All in favor? 4-0. Last set is March 15th, special called board meeting. Mr. Kehoe's made the motion to approve, second by Ms. Hunley. All in favor? And that's 4-0. Whew. Superintendent, personnel actions.
It is a very light report this month. We're about ready to get into hiring season, and so you can expect these to be a little bit lengthier from this point forward.
Okay, any questions on personnel actions? Okay, board members, we're going to ask for approval for consent items B through H, which is consider approval of facility items, consider declaration of surplus property, consider approval of contracts, So consider approval of ARC chairs, consider approval of requests for EPSB, consider approval of shortened school week, and consider approval on school capacity forms. Superintendent, your recommendation for the consent agenda?
Approve all consent items as presented with follow-up documentation.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda? Made by Mr. Dodson, second by Mr. Kehoe, all in favor, and that's 4-0. All right, Superintendent recognitions.
It is not often that I am sad at a board meeting, but this would have been a great time to have students here for these recognitions, because we got a ton of them. Tonight, we're going to recognize several different groups. The first one is the 2021 National Merit Finalist. Oldham County Schools is pleased to announce 9 students have earned the 2021 National Merit Finalist title. National Merit Finalists are chosen from the National Merit Semifinalists announced earlier in 2020. About 90% of semifinalists attain finalist standing, and more than half of the finalists will win a National Merit Scholarship, earning the Merit Scholar title. To become a finalist, the semifinalist and their high school must submit a detailed scholarship application in which they provide information about the semifinalist academic record, participation in school and community activities, demonstrated leadership abilities, employment and honors and awards received. A finalist must have an outstanding academic record throughout high school, be endorsed and recommended by a high school official, write an essay, and earn SAT scores that confirm the student's earlier performance on the qualifying test. The following are our National Merit Finalists. From North Oldham High School, Omar El Ahmed, Molly Conway, Carter Mitchell, Isaiah Terry. From South Oldham High School, Benjamin Byerly, Brooke Dardano, Christopher Stevens. And from Oldham County High School, Jenna Gentrude and Tyler Bussell. Let's give them a nice round of applause for their National Merit Finalists. Next group will be the Future City competition, folks. What would it be like to live in a city on the moon? That was the challenge presented to participants in the 2021 Future City competition. Future City is a project-based learning program where students in elementary and middle schools imagine, research, design, and build cities of the future. This year, 6 OCS teams won state awards. At the middle school level, the Kentucky Regional Champion, Team Alpha Zenith from East Oldham Middle School, the OC Health Department Awards for Substance Abuse Prevention, Kaylee Adams, Olivia Baker, Bella Dykes, William Matthews, Alejandro Villalobos, Kennedy Warricks, Nathaniel Ignacio. And it says the highlight of this, the home of honeycomb housing, Hyperloop, and Harris, heat-absorbing interchange radiation synthesizer. Second place team, Orinda City from East Oldham Middle School, Best Model Award. Mabel Vilt, Ivan Vibornikov, Mackenzie Stevenson, Josiah McCall, Riley Gennaro, Ashley Tupta, and Brandon Greer. The highlight, a moon city using nuclear fusion and genetically modified honeybees. And third place, Team Lunoris from East Oldham Middle School, the Stan Tech Creating Community Award. Ainsley Boone, Gabe Ward, Koa Greist, Hannah Tatum, Logan Alder. Highlight was a walk-in city that uses moon eyes to support the life of its inhabitants. At the elementary level, the Kentucky Junior Regional Champion, Moonville from Goshen, Julian Sweat, Sunny Shaw, Ryan Nardi, and Alec Nagel. Second place elementary, Crater Capital from Buckner, Nora Arvagiev, Grayson Weir, Sophia Burkhart, Allison Jansing, Noah Birchmeyer. Third place elementary, Floater City from Camden Station, Colin Cantway, Julia Jones, Gabe Donnelly. Let's give a nice round of applause for the Future City. And just when you thought it was over, there are more people that earn National Board certification. 2 additional OCS teachers earn their national boards. For the 2020 additional National Board certified teachers, Virginia Jenny Thomas and Robert Bob Arnold. Give them a nice round of applause. next group, the KTCCA Indoor State Track Meet. South Oldham High and North Oldham High track teams brought home awards in the KTCCA Indoor State Championship. In the boys 3,000 meter, from South Oldham High School, first place state champion Theo Bachman. Pole vault, North Oldham High, first place Hannah Everett, second place Asia Franzel. The female 800 meter from North Oldham High School, second place Sarah Rankin. And for the female 200 meter, South Oldham High School, Evelyn Pazienza. Also would like to recognize these outstanding individuals as well for a great job in indoor track. A lot of great student and staff accolades this month.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. All right, we got Superintendent 1, consider status of the calendar.
So my favorite math guy, Mr. Michael Williams.
Welcome, Mr. Williams.
How are you all this evening? So you can see the report in front of you. Last year you approved the major breaks, so those were already set for this coming up year's calendar. The current highlights for the 21-22 calendar, first day of school would be August 11th. Again, fall break was approved last year, so that would be the 18th through the 22nd of 2001. Winter break would be December 20th. And there's a typo in there, so it'd be December 31st, not 21st.
It's a very short Christmas. Getting tight.
Spring break would be April 4th through April 8th of 2022. There are 5 teacher work days. Those would be September 17th, October 15th, January 3rd, February 11th, and March 11th. The last day of school, barring any weather days, would be May 19th of 2022. And then there are 6 designated makeup days because it's on a 5-year total rotation. So however many days we've missed cumulative or each year in the last 5 years, so we're down to 6 makeup days that we have to list. So those days would be May 20th, May 23rd, May 25th, February 21st, May 6th, May 26th. Also before you is the proposed major breaks for the 22-23 school year. Again, my computer freaked out apparently on me. Fall break in 2022 would be October 24th through the 28th. Winter break would be the 19th through the 30th of 2022. And then spring break would be the 10th through the 14th of 2023. And I am more than happy to answer any questions. This will come back before you next month for final approval.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions on the calendar? Mr. Williams, thank you, and thank the calendar committee for the work on this. We will see this again next month for action. Superintendent, report number 2.
Our favorite facilities director, as well as our only facilities director, Mr. Brent Bohan.
Welcome.
Thank you. You have in your packet a construction update report for this month, and I do want to point out a few things that have developed since these reports were submitted to you. So, but I'll go through these pretty quickly here. The Oldham County High School roof replacement, as you can see that the winter weather has finally started to cooperate with us, and the contractor is back on site. And we hope to have that area weatherproof for when we return from spring break and start occupying the space below that. The foundation repair is portion of that project, which was phase 2. The design work proceeds on that, and anticipated bid date will be in the middle part of May for that project. The Buckner Alternative Classroom, as you can see in the images provided in there, and probably saw on your way in today that the roof trusses have been placed on that. The upper mezzanine slab has also been placed. North Oldham Middle, the HVAC commissioning work continues on that project, and we will be switching that over to the cooling season, and shortly after that the commissioning work will be done on that once they've seen it switch over to the cooling season. South Oldham High School Administrative Addition and Gym HVAC, the Administrative Addition overhead MEP work continues. Windows and ceiling grate installation is underway, and the exterior site work at the entrance started last week as well. There's some images included with that. The East Oldham Middle School Classroom Addition,
We have the design development approval request on that, and actually we'll bring the CD's presentation to you in the April board meeting for approval on that to go to KDE. And the anticipated construction commencement of that will be the spring, the end of the spring and into the summer for a construction period on that as well. And the item number 7, we did hear back from KDE on that, and Ms. Anderson and I have had any communications with them. So we did go ahead and bring DD approvals to the board this evening, and we'll have CDs next month for you as well. The LaGrange MSD classroom restroom renovation, most all of that work is complete. There's a few items in there that I need to do to tie it up, but the school has started to shift the furniture back around and start to use that space, or in preparation to use that space, I should say. The tennis court work out there, the contractor has started out there, and it's got it pressure washed, and as soon as the weather allows, he will continue that work there. I just want to note that the finish repairs on the cracks and ceilings on that requires a excess of 50 degrees for proper curing. I think it's for an hour, for a 72-hour period, but they have started that work. Oldham County High School, South Oldham High School band tower replacement. The structural engineers is working with our office and facilities department to develop the structural engineering drawings for that, and the anticipated work to commence on this summer, 2021 on that. And the baseball fence is actually quite a bit further along than is pictured there, and it's basically to a point of completion with a little bit of cleanup work to do. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Bohannon? Okay, thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Okay, board members, we have 6 action items. The first one is approval of policy revision 4085, and Ms. Corson is here if you have any questions. If not, Superintendent, your recommendation on action item 1, consider approval of policy revisions.
Approve the aforementioned policy revisions as presented.
Okay, we have superintendent's recommendations. There a motion to approve the policy revision made by Mrs. Hunley, second by Mr. Dodson. All in favor? And that is 4-0. The next item is consider approval of fiscal year 22 board meeting dates.
So basically, what we try to do is keep the same format that we've had with the third to last Monday of the month for the regular board meeting, and then we worked in the work sessions. There are a couple of months, I think in November and December, where we did not put a work session because of the holidays and just the turnaround time on some of the meetings. But beyond that, and then we also have the annual SBDM meetings in there based on our conversation last 2 weeks ago, that we're keeping those in January and February. And so these, once again, will come up for your vote.
Okay. Is that your recommendation?
There's no recommendation except these dates.
Board members, do you have any questions on the board meeting dates? If not, the superintendent's recommendation is to approve them. Is there a motion? Mr. Keough made the motion to approve. Is there a second? Mrs. Hunley, second. All in favor? And that's 4-0. Next item is to consider approval of fiscal year 21 Oldham County Schools high school graduation dates, times, and venues.
So you'll note that the difference between this year and last year is that we're going to be doing a live in-person graduation, and it does appear that the venues will allow us to do with all of our students present, and then we will have to do some limiting of family tickets, but we will also be live streaming. And so those dates would be Friday, June 4th for Buckner High School, and then June 5th, and that would be at the Art Center, June 5th for Oldham County North and South, and that would be at the Louisville Convention Center.
Okay, in-person graduation. Is there any questions on the locations, times? And I know there's been a lot of work put into this, so Mr. Deves, thank you and your team. Your recommendation is to approve?
Approve the 2021 OC High School graduation dates, times, and locations as submitted with updated information followed as necessary.
Okay, board members, is there a motion? Mr. Dodson made the motion to approve. Is there a second? Made by Mr. Keough. All in favor? And that's 4-0. Next item is approval of South Oldham High student request for early graduation.
AI is an 18-year-old senior at South Oldham High School. The documentation to support their early request is in your packet.
Okay, is there any questions on this? If not, I'll take a motion. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Keough, Mr. Keough approved, seconded by Mrs. Hunley. All in favor? and that is 4-0. Next item is approval of fiscal year 22 preschool calendar.
So attached is the preschool calendar. Keep in mind, they do have some oddities. They start a little bit later than the normal calendar. They do not have school on Fridays typically. That's when they do their interventions and home visits. And they don't have the number of days that the regular school calendar has. But Ms. Cashton has always done a stellar job putting this together in conjunction with our school calendar.
Okay, any questions on the calendar? Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Dodson, second by Mr. Kehoe, all in favor? And that's 4-0. The next item is the consider approval of the ESSER funding, and we heard from this earlier.
All I can say is that, once again, that committee has done stellar work, and obviously 1.5 does not go extremely far, but I think we've eked out as much as we possibly can.
Okay. And does anybody have any questions on this? I know we had a pretty intense report earlier. Not
Can we hear the whole report again?
sure, you can go to www.odomcountyschools. Is there a motion to approve the funding? Made by Mr. Dodson, second by Mr. Kehoe, all in favor? And that's 4-0. All right, Mr. Williams.
He was letting me know that, but he had to pick up his kid. There's
Public
no-
expression, okay.
He said no way.
All right, board members, there are two informational items in your packet, the preschool monthly report and the district energy usage report. And at this time, I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss the following matters: 3 litigation matters pertaining to student injuries, 1 special education matter, 1 complaint related to the district's website, and a personnel matter that may lead to the appointment of an individual. The board needs to go into executive session pursuant to KRS 61.8101 subsection C to discuss litigation, preparation, the public disclosure of which would jeopardize the board's position, and under KRS 61.8101 subsection F regarding the appointment of personnel. Is there a motion to go into executive session? Made by Ms. Hundley, second by Mr. Kehoe, all in favor? 4-0, we're in executive session.